So I made my own way down to Tarso.
Yes.
And whilst there, I was sent to, I don't know whether they were putting huge weights and they were knocking things down into the ground. What do you think they would call that?
Well, were they piling?
Yeah.
Probably. And driving piles into the ground,
and
yes.
We had to pull on the rope, 1, 2, 3, then
and
let
then
it
drop.
go, and it would thump down.
Yes.
And I had malaria while I was on that, and I was dying for a drink of water.
Yes, quite.
And when the job wasn't looking, I went to get a drink, and of course I got caught, and they hit me over the head with a stick. It nearly blinded me in this eye. So we were pleased when they announced that the railway was finished and that we were going out of the jungle. Well, they said we're going to go down by train. Well, really, when I thought of all the sabotage we'd done, I thought, well, I think I should walk instead of going on that train. Anyhow, I had malaria and they put me on the train. We went down to out of the jungle, the plains of Thailand, and it was lovely to see in the distance, especially as this place called Nakhon Pathom. It was a sort of holy city of Thailand, and there was a huge temple which was gold. And when the sun was shining on it, it was brilliant. They called it a wat.
Yes.
And whilst there, we were still doing work, and coming off work one day, a man came up to me, I didn't know who he was, and he said, is it you that's got a guitar? I said, yes. He said, if I can borrow a fiddle, can I come round to yours? So that night, after we'd finished work, he turned up with the fiddle. Now, there were about 50 in our hut, and he started off. Well, he played for barn dancers and ceilidhs in the Northumberland area. Yeah. And in no time at all, we had everybody in that hut round us. And then everybody in the adjacent huts round us. And we just, the talent that came forward, we had a lad from Derbyshire sang the Derby Ram. There was one from Lancashire sang Rottenstone Annual Fair, which seemed to have many verses. And so we went on. The laughter and the singing went on. Now the Japanese trumpeter, he blew the lights out. We didn't hear it. And it must have been about midnight when the Japanese officer had had enough and he ordered out the guard. And believe me, all these Japs with bayonets came charging at us. And the noise, you know, when you hear a stampede program on a film, that thumping noise, that was the noise of the lads from us running away. Of course, the fiddle player, who was called Jameson, and he was from Northumberland. He and I were stopped with our instruments, and there was only one man from our regiment in that hut, and he was the only man in the hut that had a shirt. And the Japs were ready to march the violin player, and when this lad Macready, he says, Len, borrow my shirt. And so I borrowed his shirt. The nights get cold out there, and the Japs gave us a beating, And then they stood us outside the guard room, and we had to put our instruments and hold them above our heads. Well, after a while, you're tired, and my guitar was on the top of my head. It's still flat up there, I think.
Yes.
And he's got his violin. I said to him, I'll swap you, but he wouldn't swap. And every time the sentries changed, of course, they would come up, they would give us a clout, and they would plink on our strings and wonder why we could make so much noise with those just small strings. And they kept us there most of the night. And the next morning, they came and they said, you go. So we went. I never saw Jefferson again. Now, can I go forward about 3 years? I'd got home safely. And in hospital, with another dose of malaria, I was in Ryop General Hospital, and I woke up, and there was the prettiest little nurse I'd ever seen in my life. And that was it. I married her, and we had 70 lovely years together. Absolutely wonderful years. So I was lucky. Now, we were expecting our first child, and I was at college in Lancashire. So I wanted to get home. It was November or December. I wanted to get home and see her because she was really getting on a bit. And so I slipped out to college one night, got a bus to Preston, got a train from Preston up to Carlisle. And when I got into Carlisle station, it was absolutely miserable. It was cold, it was raining, there was no one on the platform. It was like one of these ghost films that you see. And I was worried in case there wasn't a train. And I stamped up and down trying to keep warm. And then suddenly another person appeared about 30 or 40 yards up the platform. And of course, he must have had the same idea as me. He wanted to, I wanted to ask him if there was going to be a train. He wanted to ask me. And as he came up to me, he said, Gibson. And I said, Jamison. After all those years, we'd met again. I mean, we hadn't seen each other from being outside that guard room there on that horrible night. And of course, we had lots to tell each other when we got on the train. But unfortunately, he had to get off at Hexham. And to this day, I regret the fact that I didn't get his telephone number or his address, because Jamison just became a memory for me. So that was at Nakompeton. And whilst there, it was Christmas time, and I'd met up with someone from other regiment. What I used to do was to take the guitar when I had time, and I was to go up and down the hospital huts. And I didn't know at the time, but I got a letter in 1957 from America to say that he was writing, this man was writing his memoirs, and he came to the part where I saved his life. And his name was David Neville Fawkes. And it wasn't until afterwards that I learnt he was one of the finest stage designers in the world. Not only did he design in London, but the Americans persuaded him to go to America, and he did plays of Shakespeare on Broadway. He made films like Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Island in the Sun, Casino Royale, and Alexander the Great. And wherever he was in the world, he sent me a letter or a postcard. With the result that when my child was born, a boy, I called him after him, David Neville Gibson. And believe me, he was so grateful to me for saving his life that while he was making a film, he took the trouble to come up to Sunderland to see his namesake.
Yes.
David Neville. Unfortunately, he died in his 60s, David Neville. But as I say, from all over the world, he sent me cards. Now, when it came to Christmas, he decided he would make a crib. Well, they call it a crib, the nativity scene.
Yes.
And I helped him with it. And the things he thought of, he got bits of kapok and hung them by hairs to make like clouds in the sky. Terrific. And the figures he did, and it was amazing. And I was a member of 4. E.W. Swatton was our bass singer. Turner was our baritone. He became Member of Parliament for Oxford later on. And then there was David Neville Fawkes, this designer, and me. I mean, I was right, really in good company.
Yes.
And we decided on the hymns, the carols we would sing. And of course, they were from Upper Church do, and they wanted to sing Adeste Fideles.
Yes.
Now, for all there were 4, there were majors and colonels and captains. I put my foot down. I said, we're not going to sing Adeste Fideles. I said, there are men coming down from the jungle that's never sang a song in their lives. And they all know, "O Come All Ye Faithful." And you want to deny them the privilege of singing "O Come All Ye." So we did sing "O Come All Ye Faithful." But we got a gust of wind come, and it blew the candle onto the kapok, and the kapok set a fire to all the thing, and the thing went up in flames. But I have over there a card which was for my birthday, January the 3rd, and to say happy birthday and good new year. And it was from David Fawkes. And he got an artist to make it. And if you see that card's made out of big cards of cardboard boxes, really. And when I looked at the carefully in the card, it shows you the name of the artist that did it. And Jack Chalker, he became known as the FIPO artist. And I've got his book over there. He was really famous. So that was things that happened at Nakompeton.
Yes.
The food was a little bit better. And conditions were a little bit better. And I was beginning to really enjoy what was going on. And then wanted 1,000 men for another job. The railway had been surveyed by Germans and British and was deemed too costly on human life to build. Well, we built it in no time at all, but 16,000 died. Now, I think the Japs were being beaten in Burma and they wanted a quick way out. So they wanted a road built right across Malaya, just south of Thailand, from Ratchathpurikan in Thailand to Mergui in Burma. So it became known as the Mercury Road. 1,000 of us set off, but 100 never even got there. They fell out on the way there. And I think after about a week's work, more were dropping out. And we had to build this road, chop trees down, dig our way out. And the jobs we had to do, apart from digging out the road, we had to carry stuff. Now, we had 2 bullocks on bullock carts, and they took stuff up and down, and the bullocks, they couldn't stand the pace and they died. So who had to pull the bullock carts?
Yes.
We had to. So every morning we used to get the bullock carts filled up, sometimes with ammunition, which shouldn't have been, and we had to go 10 kilometres to the next camp, pulling these bullock carts. This part of the world was one of the worst known for leeches. And even as we were walking along, the leeches would climb onto our feet. And every so often we had to open our toes out to get the leeches out. We got them out if somebody had a cigarette, we'd get a cigarette end. Another thing was to wet the thumb and stroke them when they came out. But you couldn't pull them out, left their heads inside. Another job we had, every day we had to chop down 30 young trees and put them on the road. Because, of course, as soon as it rained, that road had no tarmac or anything down, and the Japanese trucks were stopped in the mud. You know, we'd worked all day long, and sometimes in the middle of the night, all men out, all men work, getting trucks out in the black of the night, and we were covered with mud, pushing these trucks out of the. So the idea was to lay tree trunks down for them to go over. Of course, the tyres were rolling the tree trunks round. But we had to do 30. I found out after chopping 3 trees down, they didn't fall because of all the lianas on the stuff at the top. They just swung like that. So you had to be careful. So you really chopped about 36 trees down to get your 30. And then you had to carry them and put them on the truck. The oxen that had died, they were just left there. And of course, in no time at all, everything that was needed eating was there. And when we were approached anywhere near, you could see it was like a cloud. And it was all the things that were eating on these oxen and all the flies round about. And there were these horse flies. And of course they would smell us. And we had no clothes on. We just had a Jap happy. And they would get onto our backs, and these horse flies, they were just like taking plunges out as they bit into you. So that was the only time we said, ready, go. And we ran as fast as we could, pushing these bullock carts to get past where all these horse flies were. I got a job different one day. A Japanese fella came up to me and he said, "You follow me." And he took me down into the Japanese quarters, well, the quarters, their area, and I didn't know there was a Japanese officer there, and he was in a little hut on his own, and the Japs were scared of him, and he had malaria. So they took me and they told me to take his food and take it to him. Right? So I went to the Jap's cook place, got his food, went to him, and he was lying there saying, "Ah, malaria, ah, malaria, ah, malaria." And I showed him his food. I'm saying, "Meshi, meshi, ah, malaria." So I ate it myself. Right. I suppose I was supposed to be like looking after him. It came the next meal time, I went to cook's. Now got another. Now it wasn't bacon and eggs or anything like that, but it was lovely fruit. So I took it to him again, and I showed him it, and he said, "Ah, malaria, ah, malaria." So I ate that as well. This went on for 2 or 3 days, and then one breakfast morning I was bringing, and the fruit looked lovely, and I thought, I wonder what this bit tastes like. And then there was a pink bit. There wasn't much left, and when I got it to him, he was sitting up, ready to eat his breakfast. There was very little of it left. So he sent me, he played What About the Cooks, sending a little amount. So we did all kinds of jobs on that Mergui Road. We lost a man in the jungle called Yorkie, and we found him at night time through. Really, it was dark, and we were pushing the bullock cart up a bank, and we're all shouting, "Push, push, push." And I was shouting. He was in the jungle, lost, and he heard it. And whereas we hadn't been able to find him, he found us because of us shouting. And he was covered with leeches, all round his ears and round his eyes. And so he was lucky to be found. It was a time when there were so few people left. We didn't know whether they were dying or being evacuated. But out of that 1,000, at one time there was 180 of us in the top camp. We don't know what was happening further behind us, whether they died or whether... out of the 180, most of them were in the hospital across the river. And at one time, there were 18 of us able to stand up. And of course, we had to boil water and take it to the fellas in hospital to keep them alive. And at one time, we was just standing there. The Japs didn't come to make us do any work. And the one who was there, it was their secretary, he came up and he waved us, and we gathered round. He said, "War finish, England or Japan shake hands, all men go home." Well, we couldn't believe it. The Japs had told us so many lies in the past that we didn't believe it, really. And then we had to then get ourselves out of the jungle back to the main camp, which was by the coast. Ratbury, they called it. So it was another trek. And we got the sick men who could walk, and we were helping them down the road. And after 2 days, well, we didn't walk down, we staggered down. And after 2, I still had my guitar round my neck. And they were saying, "Are you still carrying that thing? How can you still be carrying that thing?" And then some Eurasian lads dashed up to us, and they were the medical orderlies to help us back to the camp. And one of them said, "Hey, you've got a guitar. Can you play it? Will you play it to us? We haven't heard music for..." And then I went into this camp, well, it was called Death Valley, and no wonder. There weren't any walls on the tents, it was just straight like that, and the men, they couldn't sit up, never mind anything, they were just lying, dying in these camps. And I went round each tent and played and sang to them. And then, after a while, 2 or 3 days later, we had a man come into the camp. He was in uniform. And he was a tall, good-looking fella. Strange uniform. The Yank said, "He's a Yank." The Aussie said, "No, I think he's Australian." And when this man said, "Gather round, chaps," we knew he was British. The uniform had changed. We'd been away for 4 years. He had a green cap and things like that. And he said, "Gather round." And I had my dinner with me in my mess tin at the time, which was rice jippo. And he was telling us that he was going to try and get us out as soon as possible. And he looked into my mess tin and he says, "What on earth is that?" I said, "That's our meal." I said, "It's the best we've had for weeks." And he'd been talking to the Jap officer. And he picked my mess tin up and he threw it at the Jap officer and he said, "Get these men something decent to eat." And we knew then that the war had finished. To treat a Japanese officer like that. So we waited for the Dakota to come, and we had to clear then. We had to work for ourselves then, clearing away the brushwood, etc. And the Dakota came down, and meanwhile, I shouldn't tell you this really, a young Aussie and I were talking, and he said to me, "You know, he's still got his rifle and bayonet. Are you sure the war's finished?" I said, "Well, they say so." He said, "I wonder what he's guarding." There was this row of sandbanks. Well, when the Jap sentry went to have his smoke, the young Aussie and I went round to see what was there. There were bales of Thai silk. And this young Aussie looked at them. He says, "You know, I'm getting married when I get home. My girl will look sweet in this." And he picked the one up and he went out. So I thought, well, if he could take one, I could take one. But I didn't have a girl to get married to. So I went up to the village. The money I got for that was amazing. And I got a basket full of eggs and a jar full of pork fat. I think they call it ghee or something.
Ghee, yes.
And money. Now, I only wore my Jap happy. And when you got lots of money and you only wear a Jap happy, where do you keep your money? So I stuffed all my money into my guitar. Now, when we got ready, the captain of the Dakota came and he said, "Now, I think we'll be all right, but I don't want any weight on the plane because I don't know whether I'll be able to take off all right." So, taking him at his word, the only thing I had was my guitar full of money. And as I was walking towards the plane, there were a group of Thai youths. They'd never seen a plane on the ground before. So they were anxious to get as close as possible. And as I was passing, I said to one of them, "Presento," and I gave him my guitar with all the money in. On the plane, I got all their names and things in there, and reached Rangoon, crossing the tarmac to the first hut. And there, above that first hut, the first notice I would read for years, it said, "Bring your foreign currency here and we will honour it." And I'd given all mine away. And it was inside this hut we met European ladies for the first time. And we had knives and forks for the first time. We sat on chairs for the first time. And we saw food that we hadn't seen for many years. And I don't think we could eat it properly for crying. Those ladies looked after us. And then we were handed over to the Wrens. And the Wrens wanted to practically carry us here and there. They were anxious to look after us. And it was in Rangoon that we went to this hut to get shaved, etc. And then I was put into, I think it was called St. John's Convent. And it was a sort of, looked like a chapel on the main road. And I was put in there upstairs. And there was a nurse from Berwick and a nurse from Northern Ireland to look after us. Well, they were officers, you know. So you had to salute them because they were officer type. And they gave me a good showering down. Lady Mountbatten said she could smell us. The jungle was still on us. Anyhow, they showered me down when I was nice and clean. They gave me a pair of pyjamas and some slippers. Yeah, I felt overdressed, I really did. And for something to do, I walked down the stairs to the main road, and there were people walking down, up and down, and some soldiers. And I looked, and there they had the DLI badge on.
Oh, yes.
So I said, "Are you from Sunderland?" "Oh, are you from Sunderland?" "Yes." I was the only Sunderland man in that place. And they said, "Oh, yes, there's loads of Sunderland lads up there at 5 Farrow." So not thinking, I just turned and I walked in my pyjamas and slippers about 2 miles up the main road in Rangoon to get to 5 Farrow. Coincidence once again, as I walked into that camp, what should I see but Conlon, Carney, my mates from the concert party. So what did I do? I stayed there 2 or 3 nights. Was I in trouble when I got back to the convent? Those 2 nurses, they gave me a right ticking off. And then they got my pay book, and as one was sticking things in me, the other was writing down. Then I was sent up to 5 Farrow, and there were long huts with basins where you could get washed, and there was not mirrors, but there were like silvery tin stuff you could see yourself in. And I was having a shave, in cold water, of course, and a fellow at the other side, because it was double, he said, "Hello there, how's Monsoon getting on?" Well, I didn't tell you that while I was in the camp, I wrote a piece of music, and I called it Monsoon. And my idea was, when I was in the jungle, I could feel a little bit of breeze for the first time. Then I could hear things in the forest, the cicadas, and then the bullfrogs, and then the wind would get stronger and stronger, and then the rain would come pouring down. And I wanted to put all that into music, and I called it Monsoon. Now, in the Compton, there was a man called Norman Smith. Very uncommon name, isn't it, Smith? But he was a very uncommon man. He was a fellow of the Royal College of Organists. He was a fully qualified chartered accountant. He could write music as fast as I could write anything. He could remember not only tunes, but what the different instruments did in that particular tune. And he wrote music for us. Now, we had 4 violins, 2 trumpets, a clarinet, my guitar, and a bass made out of wood. And we played a variety of things. Tales from the Vienna Woods 1 minute, and then Bounce Me Brother to a Solid 4 the next, and then Tornara Sorrento, and then modern tunes like Night and Day and things like that. He was amazing. And I was just enjoying that when, as I say, I became one of the 1,000 that had to go up country. So this man, when we're having a shave, he said, "How's Monsoon?" And the man further up said, "Where's the man that wrote Monsoon?" I said, "Here." He said, "Well, I'm in the band and we're playing from Rangoon radio station tonight, and we're playing you a piece in the band." But I didn't hear it because we had to get onto a ship called the Empire Pride to be brought home. We had a terrible crossing of the Bay of Bengal. At times I was the only one that sat down to eat anything. I had to go to the galley and collect it myself, eat it myself, and take it back myself. All 14 to a table, and I was having to take it all back. We arrived in Colombo, and what a reception we got. Every ship in the harbour was doing the Victory V noise, di-di-di-da, di-di-di-da. There were 2 bands on the quayside playing. People were waving, flags were flying. It made me proud to be British. Spent 2 or 3 days in Rangoon, and then we had to board the ship again to come home. And as we were leaving, what a rare send-off we had. All the ships were once again sending, of course I could read Morse code, and they were sending bon voyage, da 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 da, you know, and they were sending bon voyage, and they were hooting the Victory V sign. The bands were playing, the flags were waving, and every ship in the harbour was signalling bon voyage. So that was the start of our homecoming. Of course, we came through the Red Sea, which was a rare experience. I'd read so many stories and heard so much about the blue Mediterranean, I was dying to see it. Believe me, I could hardly see the sea for the mist and the rain. I passed Gibraltar without knowing, and managed to get home in the docks at Liverpool. Well, you know, after four years, we were dying to get back onto land. And we were stuck on the ship for a day. And we were wondering why we couldn't get... Somebody says that there was trouble with the dockers at Liverpool. I don't know whether that was really the excuse. But it was a while before we did get off the ship in Liverpool. And some kind Liverpool people that had their own cars were waiting there and said, "Right, get in, we'll take you to the camp." And they took us out of the way to go through the main streets of Liverpool. And they had the windows down. And especially the women were coming right up and they were looking inside. And do you know what they were saying? "Either only Benz." Well, there we were. I mean, all the experience we'd had, and they still thought we looked like children. And we were taken to a place, what a name it was, Poverty Lane. And we were kept there while they examined us to see that we didn't have anything that could be carried on to the population. Now, from there, we had to wait again for a train, and the train took us to Newcastle, and it was going to be another 2 hours before the next train to Sunderland. And then somebody shouted, "This way, lads." And when we looked, one of our men, his son was a bus driver for Sunderland, and he'd brought a double-decker through. And it was outside Newcastle station. So we all crowded on the double-decker. Now, I don't know whether it was official, this borrowing of the bus, but he took us to the town hall in Forster Street, Sunderland, and there we were met by the mayor. And when he'd said his little piece, they let the doors open for our relatives to join. Well, my dad came in. And before he could get to me, there was a young woman came and jumped at me and put her arms around me. And when I said to my dad, "Who's this?" He said, "Well, it's your sister, Jenny. She'd been a schoolgirl when I left, and now she was a model for bins." So the homecoming, when I got to the street where I lived, the flags were out, all the neighbours were out. It was marvellous to be back home again. I kept calm right until about the second day. Out of my 3 sisters, 2 of them had been in the Land Army, and one had just been a schoolgirl, but she was then working. And we were sitting, when we'd got rid of all the families and things like that, we were sitting quietly in the front room. And my mother said to my sister Jenny, "Right, you're going to give him your surprise." And she sat at the piano and she played the Warsaw Concerto so beautifully. That's when I let the tears. Of course, I kept getting malaria. And every time I got malaria, they would take me to the Royal Infirmary, and the Royal Infirmary would say, "We can't teach malaria here." And they would get an ambulance to take me up to Ryop General Hospital. And it was there I opened my eyes and saw Ruby. And as I say, for 70 years, we had a marvellous life. We had a son and a daughter. My son is now in a village near Appleby, and at 70-year-old, he bought an old wreck of a pub, and he's doing very, very well with it. My daughter, she's a retired headmistress, and she comes up from Beverley every month, gets in my provisions, etc. But it was then, you see, I had no chance of being a teacher before the war, but I still had that ambition, and I always went to night school. 4 nights a week. I used to finish work at the factory, 5 o'clock. By 6 o'clock, I'd been home, had my tea, got washed, etc., changed, and I was back at Sunderland College to do science. I did science, maths, French, and English, because I was still determined to go in for teaching. That's one thing. We didn't have any money, as a family. But I was able to buy my own school uniform. I paid my own fees to go to night school. Any equipment I needed for night school, I paid for myself. I didn't ask my parents for anything at all. And they never had to tell me that it was time to go to church, time to go to choir, time to go to school. Sometimes I lived 2 miles away from the church on a Sunday, and I would run down. I would get myself out of bed, my own breakfast, changed, run 2 miles to get down to church on a Sunday morning. They never had to tell me to do a thing like that. And people now, when they talk to me, they ask me what it was like. It was hell being a Japanese prisoner of war. In one of my books, where I was working on the Mergui Road, I said, this must be hell. And yet, I can say now, I've had an absolutely marvellous life, and I would do it all over again. I would suffer the Japs because of the lovely life I've had since. Well, my dad taught me to play the banjo when I was 10. And as I said, my dad, my sister and I played. Through that, when I was a prisoner, I wanted to banjo, but I made a guitar. And through that guitar, I taught my sisters to play the guitar, and they were good singers. And we went round, I think we entertained every over 60s club and every old people's club in the Northeast. We had a marvellous time doing good and making other people laugh and sing.
Just a question that I could ask. I mean, you were making up perhaps for various things, but if you were to think back to the Japanese now, could you ever forgive them?
The Japanese now, yes. I think I might. Because the sins of the children should not be on, the sins of the fathers should not be on the children. I've had one thing I did through playing the guitar. I think I was the first teacher in England to teach music using a guitar and not a piano. And an HMI saw me doing it and said, why can't you teach other teachers to do that? So I used to take a summer school at Neville's Cross College. And I used to, in my class, oh, I've got pictures of them. There would be 30 or so in the class, 6 nuns, 6 head teachers, and the rest teachers. And it was amazing. So that this, from being 10-year-old teaching the banjo, it took me right through so many different things.
Yes. And really, it is your music that's kept you going, I guess.
I would say so, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, all the time we were prisoners of war, even when we were working, we would be thinking ideas of what to do next, thinking of different stories we could tell.
Yes.
And we would probably be singing and practicing our songs while we were wielding the hammer.
Well, I think we'll finish at that point, but Len, thank you very much indeed.